Thank you for having me.
Could you please tell the audience a little bit of your own background and also the Nonhuman Rights Project?
Yes. Well, years ago, I realized that I was quite concerned about the way in which we humans treated non-human animals. In fact, I read a book by Peter Singer, the Australian philosopher, that talked about how we treated them, and I immediately thought that I would wanted to spend the rest of my legal career working on the behalf of non-human animals. And as I began to do that over the years, I realized that there was a real problem with lawyers being able to do that. And that real problem was that all non-human animals in Western law, and perhaps in other law as well, are considered to be legal things in that they lack the capacity for any kind of legal rights. They're essentially invisible to civil law judges. They don't count in law. They're really the slaves of persons. And persons are those beings, and all of us here are persons. They are those beings who count in law, who are visible to civil judges, who have the capacity for legal rights. And that distinction between entities who are things, who lack the capacity for any legal rights and are the slaves of persons, and persons who have the capacity for one or an infinite number of legal rights, they are the masters of the things. And a thing could be this pitcher or this glass or this table, or it could be a chimpanzee. And in law, they're generally treated almost the same way. And I began at that time to try to figure out how we might be able to change the law so that at least some non-human animals could be moved from the category of being a thing with no capacity for legal rights to being a person and having a capacity for at least some of them. And that was a long trip that I began actually in 1985, and I thought it would take 30 years of work before we'd be able to file the first lawsuits in which we had some reasonable chance of being able to have courts in the United States agree that non-human animals could be legal persons. And it did take 28 years before we were able to do that. And in that time, we ended up trying to lay a foundation amongst law professors in law schools. So I began to teach animal rights law, animal rights jurisprudence in law schools. I taught the first class at Harvard Law School in animal rights law. I taught at Stanford Law School. I've taught at 6 other law schools in the United States and one in Spain. And slowly we were able to build up a body of work that we thought would be strong enough for us to be able to begin going to courts and ultimately going to parliaments as well. And then in 1995, I founded what became the Nonhuman Rights Project and began to gather people together who'd be able to work as a legal team and begin fighting in courts to get rights on behalf of non-human animals. And we actually began filing our first lawsuits in 2013. In fact, at noon, you can see the documentary film Unlocking the Cage that follows us as we begin to prepare for those suits, and you can follow how we did. And so that's really the work of the Non-Human Rights Project in the United States. And then later on, we began to work with lawyers, legal groups in other countries, including Sweden, and that's why I'm here, because I'm working with a Swedish group, with a Finnish group, who are doing excellent work as they move to try to get legal rights for non-human animals in your country and in Finland.
Thank you, Stephen. As we all know, you are working for animal rights in the courts through cases, and we need to work through the written law because our legal system is based on the written law. And we also all know the a little bit twisted thing we have in our animal protection law, that it's, for example, it's forbidden to hit an animal, but it's okay to kill it. So, and we call that protection laws. And then we have that that you are working for, animal rights. So what is the difference between to protect an animal and to have animal rights?
Well, that was one of the major dichotomies that I began thinking about early on, and I realized that there was a difference between those who were seeking to protect non-human animals and those who were seeking to gain rights for them. And those who are seeking to protect them are working within a larger paradigm of trying to pass legislation that doesn't actually focus on the non-human animals themselves, but really regulates the manner in which human beings can exploit them. It doesn't stop human beings from exploiting them. It mostly regulates the manner in which we exploit them. So there may be laws that state how you can raise animals who are going to kill to eat, but it doesn't prohibit you from killing them, and it doesn't give them, and this is probably the most important thing, it doesn't give them the right not to be killed. And so the welfare paradigm, which has been around now for 200 years, began in England in 1821, that I believe has failed. There's now many statutes, say in the EU or in Sweden or in Finland, that are set out allegedly to protect non-human animals, but the fact is that it gives them very little protection. And even if someone violates those statutes, it's almost impossible to enforce the protection that the statutes were aimed at giving. And the only way, I concluded, in which the fundamental interests of any non-human animal, of any human being, can be protected, and I think all legal history shows this, that the only way in which the fundamental interests of any being, whether it's a human being or it's a non-human animal, can be protected is when we become persons and we're actually given fundamental rights that protect our fundamental interests. And that's why we argue that at least some non-human animals should have the fundamental rights that protect their fundamental interests. And those who don't believe me, I say, well, why don't we take away all of your rights? Well, you no longer will have rights under under international treaties or under your constitution or under your statutes. You won't have any rights. All there'll be are some welfare laws that will protect you, allegedly, and if someone violates it, there's nothing you can do about it. Would you feel that your fundamental interests are being protected? And of course the answer is no. And their fundamental rights, the fundamental interests of non-human animals are not being protected either.
Thank you. So what do you answer all those who is saying to you what you are doing or claiming for the animals? In other words, animal rights. It's impossible or it's unrealistic. What do you answer?
Well, whenever throughout history a group of humans thought that they were not being treated properly, and they decided that they wanted rights or they wanted equal rights, the reigning paradigm is such that they're not recognized as being persons sometimes. At one time slaves were not, or women were not, children were not, and when people like them decide that they ought to have rights or they ought to have other rights, it always is in violation of the reigning paradigm. It always seems like it's not going to happen, it's not likely, or it's impossible. But what that means is that you have to begin the struggle to get those legal rights to which you should be entitled to which you are entitled to. And so the fight against human slavery, the fight for women's rights, the fight for children's rights, the fight for the rights of those who are handicapped or mentally ill, they all, or in the United States, the fight for gay people, the fight for gay marriage. At one point, when people first began thinking about it, they were told that it's unrealistic and that which it was unrealistic. They were told it was impossible. It was not impossible. What happened is that you have to begin, like the Nonhuman Rights Project has already begun, coming up with powerful ideas and powerful arguments that will eventually allow people to realize that the changes that you're arguing for are required. And then while you're litigating or going to parliaments, you're also beginning the educational process so that the people of your country or the people in the parliament or judges, that they slowly begin to understand the justice of the arguments that you are making. And that is how social justice works. That's how it's worked over the centuries to protect the fundamental interests of human beings, and that's how it's working to protect the fundamental interests of non-human animals.
So actually it's a great moment for everyone to make a decision where we want to stand when future history books is written.
Indeed, and I want to emphasize that we lawyers, we're not the creators of this. We're not the most powerful force behind the struggle for the civil rights of non-human animals. That you are. It's the citizens of a nation. They're the ones who have to decide that it's only right, it's only just, it's only moral for the fundamental interests of at least some non-human animals to be protected by rights. And they're the ones who have to work for that in the streets, to go to parliament, to make sure that their judges understand it. And as the country begins to understand that rights are required, lawyers like myself go in and then try to make it happen.
Okay, and then last question and short answer. How do you see into the future?
The struggle for non-human animals, for their rights is already beginning to work. In the United States, in Argentina, there are already some cases in which, for example, chimpanzees have been found to have a fundamental right. The Nonhuman Rights Project is fighting for that in the United States, and it's happening in Sweden, in Finland, in probably 10 or 15 other countries that we work with, and eventually throughout the world. And so it will slowly begin to happen. The first step is the hardest step, is the one that takes the longest. The idea that non-human animals can possibly have any kind of a legal right. Once that is understood and established, then the question and the struggle will turn not to whether a non-human animal can have a right, but which species should have rights and which rights should they have.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen, and have a lovely stay in Stockholm. And thank you to all of you who have been listening to us.
Thank you.